This is where we talk real, no filters, no cap. Straight to the top and we never look back. This is where we talk real, no filters, no cap. Straight to the top and we never look back. Leaders in the building, money on the mind. Leveling up daily, leaving limits behind. Pull up, tune in, it's time to get it done. The Millionaire Nurse Podcast has officially begun. Let's go. Tune in every week.
Let me paint you a picture. There's a nurse, advanced degree, decades of experience, multiple certifications, sitting across from a potential client. And this client needs exactly what this nurse has. The expertise is there, the results are documented, the track record is real. And the nurse says, my rate is, it depends on what you need. I'm flexible in pricing. I just want to make sure it's a good fit for your budget. And the client nods politely and the client says, let me think about it. And that nurse never hears from that client again. Every single solitary day, that scene plays out in a community of nurses over and over and over. And it's not because that nurse wasn't qualified. It is not because the client didn't need the help. It is because that nurse walked into a sales conversation carrying something heavier than her credentials. She walked in carrying sales shame. Sales shame, the deep-seated belief that asking to be paid for your expertise is somehow incompatible with being a good nurse, and the belief that's quietly bankrupting nurse businesses every day. Sales shame is not a character flaw. Let me say that again. Sales shame is not a character flaw. It is the logical result of a professional culture that has trained you to lead with service and never attach a price tag to what you know. Nursing school didn't teach you to sell. Your preceptors didn't teach you to sell. Your nursing career rewarded you for giving more, doing more, staying longer, not packaging your professional knowledge, and pricing it at its actual value. But here's what they also didn't tell you. Every single day you sell. You convince a reluctant patient to take a medication. You talk a panicked family towards a treatment decision that's going to save their loved ones. You look a physician in the eye and say, this patient is deteriorating and here's what needs to change. And you make it happen. That is persuasion, that is influence, and that is a sales skill operating at its highest level. The truth is, you are already a highly skilled professional. The only thing missing is permission to use that skill on your own behalf. And today, you get that permission. I'm Dr. V, Doctor of Nursing Practice, CEO of VP Nursing, certified speaker, coach, award-winning author, and the host of the Millionaire CEO podcast, who has helped nurses build 6- and 7-figure businesses. My nursing career started in 1992. I have been in this profession for over 30 years, from LPN through DNP, from bedside to boardroom. And I can tell you from personal experience and from working with hundreds of nurses in my coaching programs, the gap between the nurse who is struggling financially and the nurse who is building real wealth is not credentials. It is not experience. It is not talent. It is sales confidence. On this podcast, we help nurse leaders unleash your income working from anywhere, building profitable nurse coaching, consulting, and service-based businesses. And before I go any further, I know what some of you you're thinking right now. You came into business because you knew you had something valuable to offer. You built the offer, maybe you built the website, you put yourself out there, and someone asked, what do you charge? And something happened in your chest. Something closed, something hesitated, and the number that came out of your mouth was not the number you wrote in your journal. I know that feeling. I have lived that feeling, and I am here to tell you that feeling has a name, and it's called sales shame. And it's not permanent, it's a pattern, and patterns can be interrupted. And hey, if you're getting value from this episode today, go ahead and like this episode, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. Tell me, what happens to you physically when you have to name the price in your sales conversation? Does your voice get quiet? Does your stomach drop? Tell me what sales shame feels like for you right now. I read every single solitary comment. And let me tell you something that changed everything for me. Early in my coaching business, DNP in hand, decades of clinical leadership experience behind me, legitimate expertise, I was undercharging. not a little, by a lot. And every time a potential client pushed back on my rate, I folded immediately. Because somewhere in my mind, I believed that a real nurse shouldn't care too much about money. That wanting to be paid well meant I had crossed some kind of integrity line. Turns out that belief was not integrity. That belief was poverty in disguise. At the end of the day, nurses deserve to be paid at the level of their expertise, not at the level of their discomfort. And learning to sell is not about becoming someone you're not. It's about giving the expertise you have built a channel through which you can actually reach the people who need it and compensate you accordingly. So here's what we are doing today. We are going deep into the SELL framework, SELL, 4 steps. And today we are spending real time in each one, because you don't just need to understand this framework, you need to execute in a real conversation with a real buyer under real pressure. But before we get into step 1, I need to show you where the sales shame actually lives. Because most nurses think it's about confidence. It's not. It runs deeper. And once you see the root, the framework is going to make complete sense. Here's the deal. Most business coaches would tell you that sales confidence is a mindset problem. Just believe in yourself more, own your value, know your worth, and that advice is not wrong, but it is incomplete with nurses. Because sales shame in nurses is not a mindset problem alone. It is a professional identity problem, and those are different things with different solutions. The credential ceiling, the invisible income limit that nurses accept because their professional training associates their value with institutional salary bands, not market demand. In the clinical environments, nurses are evaluated on competency, compassion, and outcomes, not on their ability to command premium prices. The more credentials you accumulate, the more your institution may pay you, but the ceiling is set by the institution. You don't negotiate based on market value or your expertise. You negotiate within whatever band the organization has created. That is the credential ceiling, and it follows nurses into their business like a shadow. The credential ceiling says you have a DNP, you should be making good money. And technically that nurse might be making good money for a salaried clinical role. But in business, a DNP is not a price tag. It is a conversation opener. The actual price comes from the value you deliver to a specific buyer. And buyers don't have salary bands. They have problems. They will pay extraordinary amounts to solve extraordinary problems. Now, I know what some of you are sitting with. You're thinking, okay, Dr. V, I understand the credential ceiling, but how do I actually have the sales conversation? And what do I say? What if they push back on my price? What if they say they can't afford it? I see you. Those are real questions, and we are going to answer every single one of them. Just stick with this conversation. But I need for you to sit with one more piece of foundation first, because this is the thing most nurses are doing in their sales conversations right now that is directly causing them to lose sales. And once I name it, you're going to recognize yourself. It's called the bedside pitch. The clinical assessment style presentation that explains every feature of your service in thorough, impressive detail and leaves the buyer uninformed but unpersuaded. The bedside pitch is what happens when a nurse walks into a sales conversation and delivers a clinical presentation of her offer. She describes the structure of the program. She explains the methodology. She walks through the timeline, the deliverables, the theoretic framework behind her approach. She leaves nothing out. She is thorough, professional, comprehensive. And the buyer smiles, nods, and says, "This sounds great. Let me think about it." Because the nurse led with process when the buyer needed to see outcome. The nurse answered the wrong question. The buyer's real question was never, how does this program work? The buyer's real question was, is problem solvable, and is this the person who can help me solve it? When you shift from presenting your service to presenting your transformation, the entire conversation changes. Bedside pitch. My program is 12 weeks. We meet bi-weekly via Zoom. We cover business foundations in weeks 1 through 4, marketing in weeks 5 through 8, and scaling in weeks 9 through 12. I also include group coaching calls and a private community. That is a feature list. Nobody pays premium prices for feature. The alternative. What we do is take nurses with real clinical expertise and turn your expertise into a business that generates 5-figure contracts without cold outreach, without a massive following, and without starting over from scratch. Most of our clients have their first significant contract within 60 to 90 days. Actually, do you feel the difference? One describes the program, the other describes their life. Buyers pay for their life, not for your program. Understanding the bedside pitch is critical. But even nurses who understand it still make this mistake in real conversations because they have no replacement structure. That's exactly what the SAIL framework provides. Let's build it step by step. Step S is step into the story. The first move of the SAIL framework is step into the story. And this is the most underutilized sales skill in this community because nurses think listening is passive. It is not. Listening in a sales context is the most active thing you can do. Here's what step into the story actually means in practice. At the beginning of every sales conversation, before you say one word about what you offer, you ask questions. Not just any question, you ask the specific questions that unpack the 3 layers of every buyer's situation. Layer 1, the surface problem. This is what the buyers think they need. I need help building my business. I need marketing. I need a consultant for my unit. The surface problem is the presenting complaint. This is where most nurse salespeople stop digging. And that's the first mistake. Layer 2, the deeper problem. This is what's underneath the surface problem. I've been trying to build this business for 2 years and nothing is sticking. My team's turnover rate is costing us hundreds of thousands in orientation expenses. The deeper problem is where the real pain lies. Layer 3, the consequence. This is what's at stake if this program doesn't get solved. If I don't figure this out, I'm going to have to go back to the bedside and I cannot do that again. If our retention doesn't improve, we're going to lose accreditation. The consequence is where the urgency lies. And urgency is what makes a buyer ready to invest. When you step into the story and surface all 3 layers, you are not just gathering information, you are helping the buyer understand the full weight of their own situation. Many buyers come to the sales conversation half convinced they need help. By the time you walk them through all 3 layers with attentive expert questions, they are fully convinced, not because you sold them, because you helped them see clearly. You're probably thinking right now, Dr. V, what questions do I actually ask? I got you. For the surface problem, walk me through what's happening in your business right now. What's not working the way you need it to. Open, let them talk. For the deeper problem, how long has this been going on for? What have you tried so far to solve it? Those 2 questions reveal the history of the pain and what has and hasn't worked. For the consequence, what happens for you or your organization if this doesn't get resolved in the next 6 months? That question surfaces the cost of inaction. And once the buyer has said that cost out loud in their own words, it becomes real in a way it wasn't before. The truth is, step into the story is also a trust mechanism. In clinical practice, a nurse who does a thorough assessment, who asks the right questions and listens to the answers instead of racing to the intervention, is the nurse the patient trusts. The same dynamic plays out in business. The expert who takes time to truly understand your situation before prescribing a solution is the expert you want to pay. Now, one more layer is step into the story that most people miss. The words your buyer uses to describe their problem, those exact words, become your selling language for the rest of the conversation. If a buyer says, I feel like I'm invisible in the industry, you do not later say our program will increase your visibility. You say we help nurses go from invisible to recognized. You use their exact language because when buyers hear their own words reflected back in your solution, the instinctive response is this person gets it. The trust transfer. The moment in the sales conversation when the buyer shifts from evaluating whether they need your help into deciding whether you are the right person to provide it. The trust transfer happens during step into the story if you do it right. The moment you reflect a buyer's situation back to them more clearly than they've been able to articulate it themselves, that is the trust transfer. And once it happens, the sale becomes significantly easier because the buyer is no longer deciding whether they have a problem, they're deciding whether you can solve it. That is a much better conversation to be in. Let me give you a complete sequence of questions for a 30-minute discovery called the Step S, minute 0 to 5. Welcome. Set the agenda. I want to spend the first part of our time understanding what's going on for you. Then I share what we do and whether this might be a good fit. Sound good? Minute 5 through 15, layer 1 and 2 questions. Surface problem and deeper. Let the buyer talk. Your job is to listen and ask follow-up questions that go deeper. Tell me more about that. What does that cost you? When did it start? Minute 15 to 20. Layer 3, the consequence question. Pause here. Let the answer land. Don't rush past it. The consequence is the emotional core of the sale. Minutes 20 to 25. Reflect it back. Summarize what you've heard in their words. This is the setup for step E. Step into the story builds the trust foundation. But here's where it gets really interesting, because most nurses who do step S beautifully still lose the sale at step E. The reason is specific, and once I show you what it is, you are going to recognize it immediately. Step 2 is expose the gap, and this is the step nurses skip, and the skipping is costing them thousands of dollars per conversation. Here's what happens when nurses skip this step. They listen beautifully in step S, they ask great questions, the buyer opens up, shares the problem, describes the pain, and then the nurse, who is the helper by identity, immediately pivots to the solution. Oh, that's exactly what we help you with. Let me tell you about my program. And they launch into the bedside pitch. Instead, between the listening and the solution, a critical move must happen. You name the gap out loud with clarity in a way the buyer confirms. The gap statement, the 2 to 3 sentence summary that names where the buyer is, where they need to be, and what the distance between those 2 points is costing them. Then ask for confirmation. The gap statement is the bridge between step S and step L. Here's what it sounds like. So based on everything you've shared with me, here's what I'm hearing. Right now, you are describe the current situation in their words. What you need to get is describe the outcome they described wanting. And the gap between where you are and where you need to be is name the specific obstacle or missing piece. Is that accurate? That last question, is that accurate, is essential, because when the buyer, they're not being sold to, they're being seen. And people who truly feel seen become clients. But Dr. V, isn't that manipulative? Am I just leading them to a yes? I want to sit with this because I know some of you are feeling ethical tension right now. Here's my answer. It is manipulative if the gap doesn't exist. It is manipulative if you're fabricating urgency that isn't there. But if a nurse who has been trying to build a business for 2 years has a real gap between where she is and where she needs to be, and you name that gap clearly so she can see it, that is not manipulation. That is clinical precision applied to a business conversation. That is diagnosis, and diagnoses delivered accurately are an act of care. The buyer already knows the gap exists. They have been living with it. What they don't have is someone with the authority and the clarity to name it out loud in a way that makes the cost undeniable. When you expose the gap, you are not creating urgency. You are revealing urgency that was already there. Minimized, normalized, avoided. Your job is to make the invisible visible. Let me give you a real example. Skip the gap. Buyers say, I've been struggling to get clients for my consulting practice. Nurse immediately responds, I can help you with that. My coaching program teaches you exactly how to get clients. Buyer says, that sounds interesting. Let me think about it. Use the gap. Buyer says, I've been struggling to get clients. Nurse responds, tell me more. How long has that been going on? What have you tried? Buyer shares the full picture. The nurse says, so here's what I'm hearing. You have real expertise. You know your subject matter, but right now you're invisible to the buyers who would pay you for it. And every month that goes by without clients is another month where you're either draining your savings or staying in a job that's burning you out. Is that accurate? Buyer says yes. Exactly. Nurse says, okay, then let me show you what we do. Actually, feel what changed. In the second version, the buyer didn't feel sold to, the buyer felt understood. I feel understood is the most powerful buying state that exists. Exposing the gap creates the buying state. But here's where most nurses still lose the sale. Even after the perfect gap statement, step L is where it all comes together, and it requires the hardest shift. Let me show you what that is. Step 3 of the sale framework is lead with the outcome. This is where the presentation of your service happens. But the key word is presentation, not reciting. Lead with the outcome means that when you describe what you do, you lead with the result the buyer will experience, not the process you use to create it. Most nurses, even after a beautiful step S and step E, fall back into the bedside pitch here. They have the buyer's full attention and full trust, and then they describe their offer like it's a care plan, and the momentum dies. Here's the mistake in clear language. The buyer is not asking themselves, does this program have 12 weeks? The buyer is asking, will I be different at the end of this? Will my business be different? Can I trust that this person can actually produce the results? When you lead with the outcome, you answer those 3 questions before the buyer can ask them. Here's the structure of an outcome-led presentation. 3 parts. Part 1, date the transformation. What does the buyer's world look like after working with you? This is not your learn strategies. This is 6 months from now, you'll be X. Specific, visual, credible. Part 2, name the mechanism. The brief 1-sentence explanation of how you produce that outcome, not the full curriculum. 1 sentence. We do it by your unique approach in plain language. This is the only place in the presentation where you talk about process, and it should be brief. Part 3, prove it. Give 1 specific real result before and after in dollars and concrete outcomes. Real details build trust. Vague claims destroy it. But Dr. V, what if I'm new? What if I don't have many client results yet? Here's the deal. You may be new to business, but you are not new to your expertise. Your own story, the transformation you've made, the results you produced in your clinical role, the outcomes you drove, that is proof. Use it. I personally went from where I was to where I am now using the same approach. That is a legitimate proof source. Use it until you have client results, and then get those client results as quickly as possible by working with early clients and holding them accountable to the outcomes that they want to produce, and then you get the testimonials. Now let me go 1 level deeper on part 3, the proof, because this is where nurses commonly underdeliver. When nurses offer proof in a sales conversation, they often make it too vague. I helped a lot of nurses build their businesses. That is not proof. That is a claim. Proof sounds like one of my clients, a critical care nurse who had been trying to launch her consulting practice for nearly 2 years, closed her first $12,000 contract within 10 days of implementing what I teach. Another client went from billing hourly to closing a multi-city keynote speaking tour, $5,000 per speech with travel covered within 1 year of starting her business. These are not outliers. These are results of a repeatable framework. The truth is, specific results are worth 10 times the value of general claims. And every nurse in this community has access to specific results from clients, from her own career, from her business journey. Use the specifics. The specifics are what separates you from every other nurse, coach, or consultant using the same generic language. Leading with outcome doesn't just describe your service, it transfers belief. The buyer isn't evaluating your offer. The buyer is evaluating whether the outcome is possible for them. Your proof makes it possible. Your transformation statement makes it desirable. Your mechanism makes it credible. Lead with outcome sets the stage. But here is the move that most nurses never make, and it determines whether everything you've done in steps S, E, and the first L converts into actual revenue or politely drifts away. Step 4. This is the one y'all avoid most, and I'm going to be direct about why. Step 4 is lock the next step, and I'm going to be straight with you. This is a step that most nurse entrepreneurs actively avoid, not because they don't know it matters, but because doing it requires them to hold space for the possibility that someone may say no. And nurses built for care and connection find that discomfort different from most other professionals. The follow-up fade. The conversation goes well. The buyer seems interested. The nurse says, I'll send you over some information and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. The buyer says, great, thank you. And then silent. The nurse sends the email, waits a few days, sends a gentle follow-up, waits some more, assumes the buyer isn't interested and moves on, and wonders why her close rate is so low. But the sale wasn't lost in the follow-up. The sale was lost in the moment the conversation ended without a locked next step. The authority close is the solution to the follow-up fade. It is not a closing line, it is a decision point structure. Here's what it sounds like. Based on everything you shared with me today and what I've shown you about how we work, this sounds like a strong fit. Here's how I recommend we move forward. I'll have the agreement to you by a specific time today. Does that specific day at specific time work for you to connect briefly? Review it together and answer any remaining questions before you make your decision. Dr. V, what if they say they're not ready? That's a response to work with. Tell me what ready looks like for you. If they say, I need to talk to my spouse, absolutely. When do you plan to have that conversation? What if we scheduled a brief call for Thursday so that you can share any questions that come come up. You are not being pushy, you are being a guide. There is a difference. Here's the embedded truth about authority close. Ambiguity is not kindness. When you end a sales conversation without a locked next step, you think you're being respectful of the buyer's process. And what you're actually doing is leaving a motivated buyer with no clear path forward. And motivated buyers will find a path somewhere, just not necessarily with you. Now let's talk about objections, because a significant number of nurses avoid the authority close, specifically because they are afraid of hearing no. And I want to address the two most common objections you will hear. Objection number one, I can't afford it right now. The authority close response, I hear you, and I want to make sure that's actually the issue versus not yet being clear on what this would produce. Because if this produces what it's designed to produce, name the specific outcome, what does that do to the I can't afford conversation? Let me ask you this. If you close one contract using what I teach, does that cover the investment of the program? Pause. Let them do the math. Objection two, I need more time to think about it. The authority close response, absolutely. And I want to respect that. What specifically do you need to think about? Because if there is a question I haven't answered clearly, I'd rather answer it now than have you sit with it alone and make a decision based on incomplete information. This opens the real objection, because I need to think about it almost always means I have a question I haven't asked yet. Here's the embedded truth about no. No is one of three things. No for now, but yes for later. You follow up at the right time. No because of a specific objection, and objections are just questions you haven't answered yet. No because there's a genuine mismatch, and that saves both of you significant time and energy. Let me think about it as none of those things. Let me think about it as an incomplete conversation. The authority close creates completeness, even when the answer is no. Here's the full picture. S, step into the story. Listen at three levels: surface problem, deeper problem, consequence. Use their words. Generate the trust transfer. E, expose the gap. Name the distance between where they are now and where they need to be. Use the gap statement. Get the confirmation. L, lead with outcome. State the transformation. Name the mechanism in the one sentence. Prove it with specific. L, lock the next steps. The authority close. Specific time, specific action, specific commitment. No drift, no follow-up fade. But here's what I want you to understand on a deeper level. You already do all four of these things in your clinical practice every day. You assess before you intervene. You name the clinical problem clearly. You present the treatment plan by leading with the outcome. This medication is going to reduce your pain and prevent the infection from spreading. And you lock the next steps. I'll be back in 2 hours. Back it up. And here's what we're watching for. Sales shame is a lie. You have been selling your whole career. You have been doing it for your patients and your institution. Today, you do it for yourself. Here's your assignment for the week. Action step 1, write your gap statement. 2 to 3 sentences. Describe where your ideal client is right now, where they need to be, and what the gap is costing them. Practice saying it out loud until it's smooth. The gap statement goes into every discovery call you are starting now. Action step number 2, rewrite your offer description using the outcome-led structure. Transformation first. Mechanism in one sentence. Proof with specific real results. Pull out your current website bio, your pitch deck, or your social media description, and rewrite it for your buyer and not about yourself. Action step number 3, script your authority close. Write the exact words you would say at the end of your next discovery call. Write it. Practice it out loud. Say it before you sleep, in your car, in the front of the mirror. Your mouth needs to be trained to say these sentences without apologizing for them. Action step number 4, book one sales conversation this week using the SAIL framework. From the first question in step S to the authority close in step L. One full execution. Report back in the comments what happened. Action step number 5, identify one objection you commonly hear and write your response using the framework from step L. Have it ready when you need it. Objections are not surprises. They are predictable moments you can prepare for right now. Here's what I want to leave you with. You did not become a nurse because it was easy. You became a nurse because the work was meaningful, because the expertise you were building mattered, and it does. But expertise that stays trapped behind sales shame doesn't reach the people who need it. And a nurse who won't sell her knowledge limits the number of lives, the number of businesses and careers and organizations that she can actually impact. The sales framework is not a manipulation tool. It is a service framework. Step into the story, expose the gap, lead with outcome, lock the next step. These are acts of care. They are how you take someone from confused and stuck to clear and moving. That is the same thing you do in bedside. Now do it in your business. Drop a comment and tell me which step of the sale you are going to work on first. What was your biggest takeaway from this episode? Every single one. And if you're ready to stop guessing and build a sales skill inside a community of nurses who are doing exactly the same work, we'll send you over the link to our next live training. Comment sale. I'm Dr. V.